Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Super excited to continue our trade guide series. In today's video, we're going to focus on the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have been one of the bright spots in the Western Conference this year. They're way ahead of schedule for where a lot of people expected them to be, but I am very high on this team. I love the way that they're built, and I think that there's a good opportunity this trade deadline to continue building their team not only for this season, but for seasons to come. So if you guys are excited for that, if you're an Oklahoma City Thunder fan, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content. We're going to continue to cover the Oklahoma City Thunder over the next few days, heading up into the NBA trade deadline. And without further ado, let's jump into it here with a video preview. We're going to look at the team context, what's going on in Oklahoma City, why are they so successful. I'm going to give my quick synopsis thoughts on that. Then we'll look at their draft pick situation. That's the best place to start when it comes to discussing potential trades that the Thunder could make. What do they have for draft picks? Disclaimer, it's a lot. Cap table and tradable salaries. That's really the next important piece of information to dive into. Not only what draft picks do they have, but what salaries could they either aggregate together, cobble up to send out in a trade, or is there just one big salary that they could look to use in a trade? We'll talk about that as well. From there, we'll kind of discuss a big decision that Sam Presti and the organization has to make, and it's something that would be potentially franchise altering. I have not one, not two, but three different options for the Oklahoma City Thunder in this video, so stay tuned for that. We'll then look at some trade targets, players that I think make some sense, and then conclude with my final predictions. Again, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you do enjoy today. And let's get into that team context we talked about earlier. First thing I want to say is I want to address this comment from Justin Coleman. This came on my Western Conference standings prediction before the season started, and I said in that video that I firmly looked at Oklahoma City as a team that would be a lock to be a top 6 in the Western Conference, and I even went further to say that I looked at them as a top 4 lock in the Western Conference. You see, Justin here doubted that opinion, saying people are seriously overrating the Thunder. I get it, they're young and have a lot of talent, but it seems like everyone wants to pick them to make the playoffs so they can look smart and say they believed in them early, but the West is stacked. Well, guess what? I believed in them early, and I was 100% right, and I know a lot of you Thunder fans were big believers in this team as well, so props to you guys. If you guys were big believers in this team coming into the year, give yourself a little pat on the back. It's good to do that every once in a while because they're very, very, very good. They're a great team, and they're honestly a perfect example of how when you combine talent with a head coach who really knows what he wants to do and a scheme that fits the talent, you can win big time in the NBA. They're so good at such a young age, and there's a few things that really lead into that. First thing I want to talk about is Mark Daigneault. He's one of the best coaches in the NBA, and honestly at this point my favorite to win coach of the year, although it's not just for the work he's done this season. I think that award is oftentimes misleading. Coaches don't become coach of the year after just one season of work. There's a lot that goes into it, especially with Mark Daigneault, who has really built and instilled a culture in Oklahoma City and also just the scheme that he runs. He's very creative coach, does a bunch of different things. I think one of my favorite things that he does is kind of the combination of small to small screens, ghost screens, and all of the such. He's just an offensive genius, and I think defensively too, he maximizes his guys. He understands how to attack spacing on offense, but he also understands how to limit spacing defensively by packing the paint and kind of tightening up the gaps a bit. There's a lot of things he does very, very well as a head coach, so I just want to give him his props in this video. And there's also behind the scenes, I think, a really good camaraderie for the team. For those of you who do not know, I am a credentialed NBA reporter, so I'm in NBA locker rooms. And I'm telling you, this Thunder group is very, very special. And I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Chet Holmgren, Jalen Williams are really at the heart and center of that, because not only are they extremely talented and really the top-end talent that is lifting the Thunder up above their competition right now, but it's the fact that they're all selfless players. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has no concern about sharing the spotlight with someone else, in the way that he plays is not only beneficial for himself, but for the team as well. Chet Holmgren is the defensive anchor, has done a great job in his rookie season, and then J-Dub just seems like he gets better each and every game. He's continually improving. His handles tightened up this year. His shot making's gotten to another level. He was super efficient last year, and I think he's a much better player even this season. So the sky's really the ceiling for this team. And the question is, are they contenders or not? And that's a hard question to answer right now before the trade deadline. And I think internally, they probably view themselves as true contenders, But at the same time, I don't think that they're going to operate in the way that they believe they're contenders. They're not going to go out like a lot of other contenders would at this time of the year and make some big crazy trade unless something completely makes sense for them. We'll talk about what some of those options could potentially be a bit later in this video. Their draft pick situation, there's too many first rounders to count. I was going to go through and make sure to list every single one. They have a ton. Okay, they've got picks from Houston, they've got picks from LA, they've got picks from Denver, they've got picks from Utah, and they've got their own first. They've got pretty much picks everywhere. There's probably a couple teams I'm missing in here too. Thunder fans, you guys know you have a ton of first round picks, and really the most important thing to note about that first round pick trade flexibility is if they really wanted to get in a bidding war, they could, and they could beat any other team in the league going to get a specific player if they choose to do that. We'll talk about that again a little bit later on, but they have the upper hand when it comes to trade negotiations. And on top of that, something that I think is an underrated little piece of information here, they have 20, that's right, 20 tradable second round draft picks. And you might say, oh, second rounders, that's not a big deal. It is. And I think any team that's trying to make nice fine moves on the edge of their roster, kind of upgrading on the margins, those second round picks become very, very valuable to do so. So not only do they have a lot of trade flexibility with those first round picks, they could also really line themselves up without sacrificing any of those first round picks by offering 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 second round picks in a deal. You never know. If something crazy happens on the trade deadline day, and maybe Oklahoma City gets aggressive with those and they make maybe 2 or 3 trades centered around sending out second round picks for certain salaries that they want or certain players that they think could help them be maybe their 8th, 9th guy in the rotation. And that might just be all that really comes down to for Oklahoma City. We'll talk about that again in a little bit. Their cap table, they've got a ton of team control on super important pieces. We've talked about Shea and J-Dub and Holmgren. We've talked about Giddey in the past and how I still think he's a very talented player. He's not a part of their closing lineups, but he still does a lot of things well, and he's shooting the 3-ball rather confidently this year, which has been super important. Lou Dort, his efficiency has skyrocketed this season. He's become an even better offensive player, and of course on the defensive end, he is still the Dorcher Chamber. Kenrich Williams, I think one of the more underrated role players in the league. And then they have some of these interesting other cast members that I think honestly all project to be good players at some point. Ousmane Dieng's really the big unknown right now. He's got point forward capabilities. Thunder fans, you know what he's all about. I just think that, you know, the potential's there with him. He just doesn't have a real role with this team right now, of course. But given the fact that he was a former lottery pick, they've got restricted free agency on him after a couple of years of team options. They've got good control on his contract right now. Jalen Williams, the big man version, one of the best charge takers in the NBA. I love watching Jalen Williams play. He's honestly a player that I loved coming out of Arkansas, and I thought he was super underrated in his own draft class because I thought he was a smart big who knew how to play within himself, play within a team construct role, both offensively and defensively, and that's fit very well into what Oklahoma City's doing. Isaiah Joe, I think one of the more underrated role players in the league as well. His shooting is really pivotal for OKC because I think with the way that they move the ball, they're not a super high volume three-point shooting team, but they're very successful when they do shoot them. They shoot a very good team percentage. Isaiah Joe, I think, is a big catalyst behind that because he's really the quickest trigger shooter on the team. He loves to get those three-pointers up, and I think that's really pivotal for them, having a guy who's a little bit more of a movement shooter than anything in helping kind of build that spacing. Of course, they run a ton of 5 out, and they're able to space the floor that way with Holmgren at center, something we've seen in years past with Muscala when they had him at center, for example. But Joe, super important in my opinion. Cason Wallace, he's like the perfect small-to-small screener. That's part of why I loved his fit so much in OKC. Honestly, pre-game workouts, I've had the privilege to watch the Thunder in person twice this year, and Cason Wallace, pre-game before the games actually start, when they're working out players, they literally have him screening and rolling. And it's so fun to watch because I feel like they're so creative, and that's something other teams just simply don't do. When it comes to their expendable contracts, so contracts that I could actually see them moving, Davis Bertans has a player option for next season at $16 million. He is definitely someone who, if a deal comes along that they want to pick up a bigger salary, his money makes sense to send out. So does Vasily Micic at a little bit over $7 million with some future years on that. The final year of that contract is a team option. They have Alexei Pokusevsky's contract, which is an expiring $5 million contract this year, which could be definitely used. And then they also have Tre Mann, who has a team option for next year, a relatively cheap deal, a bit under $5 million. So you have tradable contracts, you have ways to cobble up salary. They could theoretically get up anywhere from $30 to $35 million in a salary if they wanted to, but more than likely you could see them working anywhere from, down low like $3-4 million all the way up to maybe $20 million if they don't aggregate these salaries on the right altogether. But it is important to note that they do have the flexibility of doing that if they so choose. And why would they choose to do that? Well, it really comes down to a franchise-altering decision, and there's really three options here. And I like all three options for this team. I like a couple of them a little bit more than others. The first option, that's the option that a lot of people are hyper-fixated on and probably correlates to the thumbnail in this video a bit. It's buying big time. And we'll talk about some of those options here, but that is making a big splash trade, sending out 3, 4, 5 first-round picks in a trade to get a high-quality starter, maybe even an all-star caliber player into your rotation. It kind of reshuffles the way that the team looks, and I'm not sure that they have to do that. Again, we'll discuss that option here, but that's the big move. And with their trade flexibility, all of their trade assets, it's not going to be super detrimental to them if they do make that decision. They have a lot of flexibility, more than any other team in the league, so they can afford to go big time if they want to. They could also just buy little. They could make one small move on the margin, maybe two small moves on the margin, where they're just trying to upgrade. Again, their 7th, 8th man in the rotation. Is it possible to upgrade over Kenrich Williams? Is it possible to maybe even get a better shooter than Isaiah Joe? Not saying that they'll do those things. I'm saying that those are things that maybe internally they'll consider. Maybe it's a backup big man behind Chet Holmgren. We'll talk about that as well. I have a couple of options for both big time buys and then also smaller buy moves that I could see them making. And then the final option is eating bad contracts again. Now, a lot of people are just going to talk about them with those first two options. Do they buy big time or do they just make a small move? Otherwise, you could maybe even say they just stand pat. I don't think they'll do that because Sam Presti makes more trades than anyone else in the NBA. He is always active seemingly. Every single year he's making some kind of trade. So I don't think standing pat is really on the table for Oklahoma City, just given their history and Sam Presti's history specifically. He's made more trades again than anybody in his tenure as a GM. So he's very, very active. So if they're going to make moves, if it's not buy moves, it's maybe even a sell move where they're getting a little bit worse. That could be trading an expiring contract, perhaps like Pokusevsky plus Tre Mann, and they could cobble those salaries together to eat a contract of a player a team wants to get off of. For example, the LA Clippers would theoretically want to get off of PJ Tucker. Maybe the Thunder would take in PJ Tucker, give up Pokusevsky and Tre Mann, and then from there maybe get a second round pick back for them as well. That's just a hypothetical off the top of my mind. I didn't even prep that for this video, so don't take that too seriously. It's just kind of an idea that just sprung into my head right now as a loose example for what eating a bad contract could look like, because OKC still has salary flexibility right now. They're not really pressed up against the cap long term. They do have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's contract, of course, that was extended. Very good contract for them, a no-brainer, of course, but they don't have a lot of pressure right now, just given how young most of their core roster is, which is a phenomenal place to be if you're the Oklahoma City Thunder. But let's talk about those big-time trade targets, and there's really two players specifically that I want to focus on. That's Mikal Bridges of the Brooklyn Nets and Lauri Markkanen of the Utah Jazz. Now, right now, the current reports and the rumors are that neither of these players will get traded, and I almost certainly believe that for Lauri Markkanen, so you can almost cross him off. I just don't think he is going to be available this season. The Jazz have been playing much better as of late, and I think Danny Ainge is looking to get a massive haul, and I'm talking 4 or 5 first-round picks plus a good young player or two in any type of trade for Lauri Markkanen. So probably one that we just don't see happen this year, which is okay. I did want to mention him because I do think he would be a phenomenal fit onto this team. He would give them more length and size, a little bit more rebounding, but also still not sacrifice the way that they play and not hurt their team identity, which is, again, you're able to space the floor, play with pretty good pace, you're able to get a ton of driving lanes. They drive more than any other team in the league. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, of course, spearheads that, but everyone else is capable of playing off the catch, attacking closeouts. They're just a really great, fun offensive team to watch. And again, the defensive side of the floor, they're much better than anyone really anticipated because they've got a lot of length, quickness, and just an overall very good scheme that shuts down some of those driving lanes for other teams. They do a good job shutting off the paint despite being a little bit smaller. And if they just rebounded the ball a bit better, they'd be really impossible to beat. But right now, they're nearly impossible to beat anyway, it seems. And then Mikal Bridges would be another great fit for Oklahoma City because he's another player who is just excellent off the catch. He's not your true typical star where you're going to drop 20 isolations a game for him, but that's perfect for what OKC would probably want to do with him, which is probably kind of restore him back to the role he was in Phoenix, where you're looking at a player who is more of a defensive-minded player. This gives them some more defensive flexibility in terms of matching up with some of the bigger teams in the Western Conference. Let's say you're worried about Karl Anthony Towns. I think Bridges matches up a little bit more comfortably in that matchup than some of the other Thunder options like Jalen Williams, like Lou Dort, who are just, I would say, a little bit more undersized compared to Mikal Bridges, especially from an experience standpoint. Come postseason time, Bridges probably a little bit more reliable of an option, but I'm very certain that the Thunder are not really worried about that. If you're asking me right now, do the Thunder make a big-time trade? The answer to that is no, because I just don't think that they look at the roster and say, now is the time to buy, now is the time we're contenders. And the reason for that is because they're one of the youngest teams in the league. They view themselves as true contenders for the next 6, 7, 8, 9 years, for the long haul. And that's a great thing. And that's a testament to how well Sam Presti has not only made decisions in trades, but drafted and developed. And I think, again, if we're going to hype up Mark Daigneault, that's a big reason why. He has developed these players to fit within his scheme, fit within his system, able to attack closeouts, be so comfortable with the basketball, limit turnovers, and still play a very aggressive, fast-paced, and ball movement-oriented type of play style. They do a great job. Just up and down the lineup, everyone is so well coached, and I just think the team is really well put together. They don't have to make a big-time splash trade if they don't feel comfortable doing so. And with some of the reported returns for what a Lauri Markkanen or Mikal Bridges trade would look like, I just don't see that coming to fruition, which is okay. Because when we look at smaller trade targets, there's a lot of other players that I think could really benefit this team as well that won't cost quite as many draft picks. First one I want to touch on, Alex Caruso. Now, think about upgrading Cason Wallace this season. You probably turn him into an Alex Caruso. Better defender right now. Caruso is one of the probably top 10, top 15 defenders in the world. He's one of the better perimeter point of attack defenders. He's super quick, but he matches up well with bigger players out on the wing. And he's rather tough, honestly, with his ability to cut guys off. And I just think he positions his body so well that he plays stronger than he really is. Wendell Carter Jr. makes sense for the offensive end of the floor. If you're looking for another center to have in to kind of help address your rebounding a bit, I think Wendell Carter Jr. makes a good deal since he shoots the three ball well. This would allow Oklahoma City to probably play Carter Jr. and Holmgren together a bit, which would be pretty unique for them. They oftentimes stray away from two big lineups, of course. That's really most of the modern NBA is strayed away from that. But Carter Jr. probably helps you match up again better with Minnesota. If that is something that ends up coming into a playoff series, that could be a big factor in whether you win or lose that series, is how do you match up with Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns. Now, I don't think that Holmgren and Carter Jr. are big enough to really deal with them either, but if you're able to pack the paint enough with your guard play and wing play around that, having those two bigs instead of one definitely does go a long way in benefiting you. Kelly Olynyk, another player that, hey, maybe we're worried about Nikola Jokic, maybe you want to throw another body at him. Olynyk's not going to stop him, but he's somebody who can probably bring a little bit of that physicality. He's played playoff basketball before. And no, I'm not saying Kelly Olynyk is this big enforcer or anything like that. I'm just saying you need to have some bodies that you trust. And I think Olynyk specifically gives them some good offensive juice as well. He's capable of handling the basketball, pushes well in transition. I actually think his ability to attack closeouts and also catch and shoot the three ball would probably fit extremely well in Oklahoma City as the true backup center behind Holmgren. Wendell Carter's probably a bit more expensive to acquire anyway. He could be better long-term for OKC, but if you're looking at a short-term upgrade, to your bench unit, Kelly Olynyk makes a ton of sense to me. In fact, I would say he's probably the best target on this list for the Thunder. Dorian Finney-Smith, a player that right now there's rumors going around that the Nets have turned down offers of 2 first-round picks for Dorian Finney-Smith. My understanding of that situation is that is not entirely accurate, because I think behind that, even if they've been offered 2 first-round picks, they're probably heavily protected first-round picks that likely aren't going to convey for years and years and years. So I think if a team really offered 2 actual true first-round picks for Dorian Finney-Smith, the Nets would have traded him by now. So if Oklahoma City gets involved and offers 3 second-rounders and a first-rounder, which is a lot of compensation for a normal team, they could probably get DFS in the building. But again, with how much draft capital they have, they probably don't feel that as much as any other team naturally would making that kind of trade. And I think Dorian Finney-Smith would be a really nice fit for the team, especially defensively. If you're looking at matching up with bigger teams, if you're trying to guard Denver and you want to put somebody on Aaron Gordon to kind of mitigate his cutting and have just a bigger bodied frame around him, Dorian Finney-Smith's a couple inches taller than a lot of the other wings that currently play for Oklahoma City. So because of that, his defensive acumen, now he hasn't been quite as good of a defender the last couple of years as he was maybe 2.5, 3 years ago when he made a conference finals run with the Dallas Mavericks, but I still think that around the right unit he can get back to that level. And for OKC, you're not relying on him to play 34 minutes a night like Dallas was a few years ago. You're probably asking him to play anywhere from 18 to 22 minutes a night, which is probably a little bit better for where he's currently at in his career anyway. And then a hot button topic name, Andre Drummond. In a few games he started this year, he has rebounded the actual crap out of the basketball. I mean, 25 rebound game here, 20 rebound game there. Drummond is a player that is very polarizing for a few reasons. His raw statistical numbers always are better than his actual production should suggest. He's not as good of a player as his rebounding numbers really indicate. But I still think if you look at Oklahoma City, what are their strengths and what are their flaws? Their biggest strengths are driving the basketball, playing off the catch. They do a very good job shooting the basketball when they are pulling the trigger. Their offense is really well built, and their defense is, again, coming along, and I think they're already got a good identity built. The one big flaw is they just don't rebound the basketball very well. And I think Andre Drummond, if you look at his biggest strength, he would really lift up this team in his minutes on the floor. And the thing is, if you trade for Andre Drummond, it's not going to cost you a first-round pick. It's probably 2 or 3 second-rounders. I think if you offer 3 second-round picks, you get the deal done, no question about it. And remember, this team has 20 second-rounders to work with over the next 7 years. So if they offer 2, they might even be able to get him anyway, but 3 would probably ensure the deal gets done. And if you want to play Drummond on a certain night to match up with Gobert or to match up with Jokic or to match up with player X, Y, and Z in whatever matchup you're playing, Drummond can do that for spot minutes. He can play 4 to 6 minutes and really change kind of the way the game is playing out, especially if you're getting killed on the boards, which, remember last year in the play-in, that's exactly what happened to them as they lost to Minnesota. Drummond could help change that. But at the same time, Drummond doesn't really fit their scheme and their system at all. So if you're going to massively improve your rebounding, you're hurting your other areas that you're already great at. So I think for Drummond, it's kind of a catch-22 where you get much better at one of your biggest weaknesses, but you also dampen some of your biggest strengths. Now, if you trade for him, though, it's not like you have to play him every single game. He's a veteran. I think he'd be understanding of the situation. He's getting traded to a team that I would deem as right on that like kind of cusp of contention. So if he's expecting to play 25 minutes a night, that's just not going to be the reality for Andre Drummond. If you play him 12 minutes on nights you need him, it might help you win even more games than they currently are. So for a cheap price point, a couple second round picks, it might be worth doing. Maybe throw Pokusevski's contract back to Chicago. Maybe it's Trey Mann. We'll see what happens with that. But they've got the salaries to get something like Andre Drummond done. They have the second round picks to do it as well. And I think he could make some sense giving Mark Daigneault just another option in their front court if they feel like they need it. But to me, he doesn't really fit like a Sam Presti style big man anyway. So I'm just not really sure that I see them doing it, but I wouldn't completely rule it out either. And I did want to touch on it in this video. When it comes to those pathways of eating contracts, there's just a few things I wanted to touch on here. Again, I don't have real contracts built in my head of who would they look to eat. You know, Ben Simmons comes to mind. I just don't really see that happening. Andrew Wiggins came to mind. I am a little unsure about that, if that's going to happen. I do think Wiggins would actually be pretty good with the Oklahoma City Thunder. But this is kind of the rationale behind it. They would add in more draft compensation. They would push out current picks to further out for future years. For example, they've already done that this year when they got involved with the Clippers and Sixers trade of James Harden. They pushed back a pick to kind of open up a future pick that they got from in that deal from the Clippers. So I think that Sam Presti's always navigating, always looking to accumulate more draft choices, improve their flexibility, and I think for OKC, that should be one of their top priorities still, is even though they're super good already, they are in a spot where a lot of people would say go buy. Sam Presti's going to do what he sees fit, and a lot of the times that's eating contracts to get more draft capital. We saw him do it this past summer with Kevin Porter Jr.'s contract, and I wouldn't rule him out doing it again this trade deadline, which I know a lot of people are going to be kind of disappointed about if that's all he does, but I actually just think it's pretty smart, and it's a big reason why OKC is as good as they are, because he navigates the cap well, he navigates trades well, and he puts himself in a really good position in terms of how much draft capital they have, always working with the pick surplus, and because of that, they're just oftentimes better than a lot of other teams in the team building area, which is super important. So what are my final predictions for the team? First of all, I think they're going to improve. I do think that they're going to make a smaller buy. I don't see anything bigger like Mikal Bridges or Lauri Markkanen like we talked about, but I could see them do anything from Alex Caruso to Dorian Finney-Smith, maybe Royce O'Neal, who I didn't mention. I could see them making a small upgrade somewhere. Drummond, I could see them going for Kelly Olynyk. That's really the player I would love to see there in Oklahoma City. I could also see them upgrading their bench on the margins a little bit as well. If that's just, again, getting Dorian Finney-Smith, making him your seventh man instead of Kenrich Williams. I know Thunder fans are going to be sad about me saying that about Kenny Hustle, but Dorian Finney-Smith, just a little bit more playoff experience, probably just a little bit more reliable. And even if it's not a, hey, this guy plays over this guy, it's maybe they both play together and you have more lineup flexibility. You have another bigger wing on your roster that's able to help you match up better. And I just think if OKC can deepen their roster, deepen their playoff chances just a little bit for cheaper price points, it's definitely worth considering, because I do think they're right on that ring of contention right now. They're very young. A lot of people will completely discredit them because of that. I'm not doing that. I think that they have a real shot as long as they make small upgrades here and there, and if things go right for them in the playoffs, because again, we have to see Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as the #1 guy in the postseason. This will be Chet Holmgren's first ever playoff run. This will be Jalen Williams' first ever playoff run. It's hard to bet on them winning it all, but at the same time, I'm not saying it's impossible, because this team is really, really good. They're probably going to improve their flexibility still. Again, Sam Presti, just like I mentioned earlier, he's always looking to improve his flexibility, getting future long-term draft picks. And I think this year they're going to probably stay pick neutral, where if they trade out some second rounders, they probably get a couple second rounders back. Or if they trade out a first rounder, maybe they find a sneaky way to pick up a future first. They trade a pick swap, or they do something crazy that no one's predicting right now. And I think that they stay as close to pick neutral as they currently are built, because I think they want to stay with the pick surplus going forward. I think they want to continually replenish young talent around Shai, Holmgren, and J-Dub, and I think they're going to find ways to do that because Sam Presti is a genius. Thank you all so much for watching. I really had a blast recording here on the Oklahoma City Thunder. If you guys haven't already, go follow us on our socials. That is our Twitter, links in the description, our Instagram, links in the description, as well as go join the Discord. We've got a server of 200 plus awesome people who love basketball just as much as you and I do. We'll talk about the Oklahoma City Thunder in there. We'll talk about NBA trade ideas. We talk about everything. It's a great place to be. We've got a ton of awesome moderators. Shout out to them. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.